"I don't live in your HOA." Those were the only words. I said you would have thought I confessed to robbing a bank. The woman standing in front of me froze for a moment before her face turned bright red. She pointed toward the neighborhood entrance and shouted, "Then you need to leave immediately." I looked around honestly, confused. "I'm here to inspect property." "No, you're trespassing." Then she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." What she didn't know was that the paperwork sitting inside my truck gave me ownership interest in every single house surrounding us. She was about to call law enforcement on the one person who had invested millions of dollars into this neighborhood. 3 years earlier, I started investing in residential rental properties across central Texas. While everyone else chased flashy apartment towers, I preferred quiet suburban neighborhoods, stable families, good schools, long-term tenants. Oak Ridge estates checked every box. Most investors overlooked it because the homes sold one at a time. I saw something different, an opportunity to build a portfolio, patiently one property after another. I never bought all the homes at once. Whenever an owner decided to sell one of my investment companies, made a competitive offer, everything was legal, everything was recorded to the county. Over several years, the portfolio slowly grew. 5 houses became 12, 12 became 25, eventually all 60. Homes were under companies. I managed people always asked the same question. How could nobody notice? The answer is simple. Every purchase was completed through properly registered property. Companies' accounting records were public. Nothing was hidden unless someone carefully traced the ownership structure. It simply looked like different companies owning different homes a day. Everything changed. Started like any other. Several homes were scheduled for exterior improvements, new roofs, fresh paint, updated landscaping. I wanted to personally inspect the work before contractors began. It was supposed to take less than an hour. Instead, it became the longest afternoon of my career. Before I reached the first house, a woman marched straight toward me. "You can't be here." I smiled politely. "Good afternoon." She ignored the greeting. "What address do you live at?" I don't. Her eyebrows shot upward. "You don't know?" She crossed her arms. "Then why are you inside our neighborhood?" I explained I was inspecting property. Karen immediately interrupted. "If you don't live here, you're violating HOA rules." I answered honestly, "I'm not in your HOA." She smiled as if she just won an argument. "Exactly." Then she reached for her phone. Karen described me as an unauthorized person refusing to leave private property. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I simply leaned against my truck and waited. Experience had taught me something. When you know you're right, there's no reason to panic. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into the neighborhood. They greeted everyone calmly. One deputy listened to Karen. The other walked over to me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on today?" I smiled. "Absolutely." Instead of arguing, I opened my truck. Inside was a neatly organized folder. Property records, inspection schedules, management agreements. The deputy flipped through the first few pages. Then he looked back at me. "Sir, are you telling me you own these houses?" I nodded. I can explain exactly how the ownership is structured behind him. Karen's confident smile slowly disappeared. The county immediately secured the basement. Engineers wanted to make sure opening the vault wouldn't damage the hotel's foundation. While everyone else looked excited, Linda looked nervous. It was a first sign that she knew something the rest of us didn't. By the next morning, the story was all over the local news. Reporters guessed the vault might contain gold, cash, or priceless antiques. I refused to speculate. My priority was finishing the restoration, not chasing rumors. Curious about the hotel's history, I visited the county archives. The original blueprints showed every room, every hallway, and every basement wall, but there was no mention of a vault anywhere on the plans. A retired local historian recognized the building immediately. He told me the hotel's original owner was known for protecting important business records. Then he leaned closer and quietly said some secrets were never meant to disappear. That night, my security cameras recorded someone lingering near the construction site. They never tried to break, and they simply stood there staring at the basement entrance before disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, we found fresh footprints near the excavation. Nothing had been stolen, but someone had definitely entered the property overnight. Whatever was inside that vault, someone wanted it badly. The county hired professional vault specialists to inspect the locking system. After several hours of examination, they reached an unexpected conclusion. This wasn't an ordinary bank vault. It had been custom-built nearly 100 years earlier. Linda became increasingly aggressive. She insisted the HOA deserved immediate access. Before anyone else, county officials refused. Legally, the hotel and everything attached to it belonged to me unless a court ruled otherwise. That afternoon, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was an old brass key and a handwritten note. It read, "The truth is worth more than the treasure. Trust no one from the HOA." The key looked ancient, but no one knew whether it actually belonged to the vault as I stood in the basement. Holding it, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting decades for this exact moment. The real mystery was only beginning writing. 2 days later, I walked into the HOA clubhouse carrying a single binder. The room was packed with board members sitting on one side of the table, while homeowners filled nearly every chair. Karen looked determined to regain control of the meeting. Without even greeting me, she opened with the same question, "Mr. Brooks, why didn't you tell anyone you own these homes?" I smiled politely and answered, "Because no one ever asked." The room became completely silent. Instead of arguing, I placed renovation plans on the table, showing new roofs, energy-efficient windows, updated landscaping, fresh exterior paint, and sidewalk repairs. The estimated investment exceeded $3 million. Several board members looked at each other in disbelief, and one finally asked, "You were planning all of this?" I nodded and said, "For one, at every renovation delayed." I looked at my property manager and said, "Let's find out who filed them." Months, the mood inside the room changed. Almost instantly, people stopped whispering about ownership and started asking questions about improvements. When do the roofs begin? Will sidewalks finally be repaired? What about the playground? For the first time, the meeting felt productive. Karen wasn't finished and said, "Regardless of your investments, HOA rules still apply." I nodded immediately and said, "I agree." That answer caught everyone off guard because I had never claimed otherwise. I explained the difference between ownership management and HOA governance. The homes were owned through properly registered companies. The companies hired my management business, and everything had been disclosed in public records. Nothing was hidden. A retired accountant in the audience quietly said, "That actually makes perfect sense." One of the longest-serving board members finally spoke and said, "I think we spent years making assumptions instead of asking questions." Nobody interrupted. Even Karen stayed quiet. Sometimes one honest sentence changes an entire meeting. Next came the numbers: annual maintenance budgets, roof replacement schedules, emergency repair funds. Everything was fully planned years in advance. One homeowner whispered, "I had no idea someone was investing this much here." Questions that had once been directed at me were now directed toward the board. Why did we know about these improvements? Why was the sheriff called before anyone asked for identification? Karen searched for an answer, but none came. I made a simple proposal. Let's stop arguing. Let's communicate. If the board wanted updates before major projects, I'd gladly provide them. If I needed HOA approvals were required, I'd follow the process. The room relaxed for the first time. Everyone was working toward the same goal. Just as I reached my truck, my property manager ran across the parking lot. "Daniel, you need to see this." He handed me his tablet. Someone had anonymously filed complaints against nearly every renovation permit we'd submitted, and every complaint had been filed within the last 48 hours. The meeting might have ended peacefully, but the real battle was only beginning. I scrolled to the complaint list: roof replacement, exterior paint, driveway repairs, tree trimming. Every permit we'd filed had suddenly received an objection. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The following morning, we visited the county development office. The staff couldn't discuss every detail immediately, but they confirmed one important fact: the objections had all been submitted within a very short period. Every complaint used almost identical wording that suggested coordination, not independent concerns. With the permit reviews temporarily paused, contractors couldn't begin scheduled work. Roofing materials sat on trailers. Painters waited for approval. Landscaping crews had to reschedule. Every delay meant higher costs, and someone clearly knew that. Homeowners began approaching me directly. "Why hasn't construction started? When are the repairs coming?" Instead of blaming anyone, I explained that the county was reviewing recent objections. People appreciated the honesty. Rumors faded. Facts began replacing assumptions. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from one of the contractors. He had spoken with another developer who recognized the wording used in the objections. Apparently, the same template had appeared in unrelated projects across the county. That meant we were dealing with a pattern, not just one disagreement. A second meeting was scheduled. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of accusations, people wanted updates. The board reviewed revised construction timelines. Everyone agreed that open communication would prevent future misunderstandings. It was the most productive HOA meeting I'd ever attended. After reviewing every objection, the county reached its conclusion. None of the complaints identified safety violations or code issues requiring the projects to stop. The permit reviews were completed, and the renovations were clear to move forward. Work could finally resume. Within days, the neighborhood looked alive again. Roofs were replaced. Fresh paint brightened aging homes. Landscapers restored neglected yards. Residents who had been skeptical at first now stopped to thank the crews as they worked. At the next community gathering, Karen addressed the neighborhood. She acknowledged that the earlier situation had been based on misunderstandings and emphasized the importance of verifying information. Before making assumptions, the meeting ended on a constructive note, and residents applauded the commitment to better communication going forward. As I looked across the neighborhood, I realized something owning homes wasn't the most valuable investment I'd made trust was the misunderstandings had been. Resolved renovations were back on schedule, and the community was moving forward together. But there was still one final chapter left before the story truly came to an end. 6 months passed faster than I expected. The neighborhood barely looked the same. Every roof had been replaced, fresh paint brightened, every street landscaping transformed empty yards into beautiful green spaces. Investment had done exactly what I hoped. Property values improved. More importantly, people finally felt proud to call Oak Ridge Estates home. The biggest reward wasn't financial. It was watching neighbors actually enjoy their community again. Children played outside until sunset. Families organized weekend cookouts. People who barely spoke before now greeted one another every morning. Sometimes small improvements create the biggest changes. The next HOA meeting felt completely different. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody accused anyone. Instead, residents discussed future projects, walking trails, new playground equipment, community events. The neighborhood had finally become a team. As everyone began leaving, Karen walked over. She took a deep breath and said, "I made assumptions. I should have asked questions first." I shook her hand and told her we all learn sometimes the hardest words to say are simply "I was wrong." From that day forward, communication changed everything. Before every major project, we met, shared plans, answered questions. Problems that once created conflict were solved with simple conversations. To celebrate the completed renovations, the neighborhood hosted its first community festival in years. Food trucks, live music, games for the kids. It wasn't about property anymore. It was about people. As I stood beside the entrance sign, I remembered the day Karen called the sheriff back. Then this neighborhood saw me as a stranger. Now people waved as they drove by. Funny how quickly first impressions can change. That experience taught me something valuable. Ownership isn't about control. Leadership isn't about winning arguments. Real communities grow when people listen before they judge. One conversation can prevent months of conflict. People still ask me what was the best investment. It wasn't the 60 houses. It wasn't rising property values. It was earning the trust of an entire neighborhood that's worth far more than any real estate portfolio. And that's how a simple misunderstanding turned into a lesson about communication, respect, and community. Sometimes the biggest conflicts begin with assumptions and end with conversation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I'll see you in the next story.